Sarah Martinez stepped out of her silver BMW, adjusting her designer sunglasses as she surveyed the modest neighborhood around her. The houses here were smaller than what she was used to, with chain-link fences and children's toys scattered across front yards. She had moved to Millbrook only 3 months ago after her divorce, seeking a fresh start away from the wealthy suburbs where everyone knew about her failed marriage. As the successful owner of a high-end marketing firm, Sarah was accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Her new house on Maple Street was a significant downgrade from her previous mansion, but it was still the nicest property on the block. She had chosen it precisely because it made her feel superior to her new neighbors, most of whom worked blue-collar jobs and drove older cars. The sound of a rumbling fire truck caught her attention as it slowly made its way down the street. Sarah rolled her eyes, annoyed by the noise disrupting her peaceful Saturday morning. The bright red vehicle came to a stop just 2 houses down from hers, and she watched as several firefighters climbed out. They were conducting some sort of inspection, checking fire hydrants and making notes on their clipboards. Among the firefighters was Jake Thompson, a 32-year-old man with kind brown eyes and a genuine smile. He had been serving the Millbrook Fire Department for 8 years, following in his father's footsteps. Jake lived modestly in a small apartment across town, sending most of his paycheck to help support his elderly mother and younger sister, who was attending college. Despite his limited income, he found deep satisfaction in his work, knowing that every day he had the chance to help people in their darkest moments. As the firefighters worked, Jake noticed the woman standing beside the BMW, clearly watching them with what appeared to be disdain. He had seen her around the neighborhood before but had never had the chance to introduce himself. Being naturally friendly, Jake decided to walk over and say hello. "Good morning," Jake said with a warm smile as he approached Sarah's driveway. "I'm Jake Thompson with the fire department. We're just doing our routine safety checks in the area. I don't think we've met yet. I'm guessing you're new to the neighborhood?" Sarah looked Jake up and down, taking in his standard-issue uniform and work boots. Everything about him screamed working class to her, from his practical haircut to his genuine attempt at conversation. She had dealt with plenty of service workers in her business, and she knew how to establish the proper hierarchy. "Yes, well, I suppose someone has to do these jobs," Sarah replied coldly, not bothering to remove her sunglasses. "I'm Sarah Martinez. I run Martinez Marketing Solutions. Perhaps you've heard of it? We handle accounts for several major corporations." Jake's smile faltered slightly at her tone, but he maintained his friendly demeanor. "Can't say I have, but it sounds impressive. We're always grateful for successful business owners in the community. They help keep the local economy strong." Sarah let out a small laugh that held no warmth. "I'm sure they do. Tell me, what exactly does a firefighter make these days? It can't be much considering the level of education required for the job." The question caught Jake off guard. He had encountered dismissive attitudes before, but rarely so blatantly. "Well, it's not about the money for most of us. We do the job because we want to help people. The training is actually quite extensive. We study emergency medical procedures, hazardous materials handling, rescue techniques." "Oh, I'm sure it's very complicated," Sarah interrupted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Spraying water on fires and helping cats out of trees must be incredibly fulfilling for someone with limited options." Jake felt his cheeks redden, but he kept his voice steady. "Actually, we respond to all kinds of emergencies. Car accidents, medical calls, natural disasters, structural collapses. Last week we helped deliver a baby when the ambulance couldn't make it in time. Every call is different and everyone matters to someone." Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "I'm sure you all think you're heroes, but let's be honest, if you had other options, better opportunities, would you really choose to risk your life for such little pay? Most people in these kinds of jobs are just settling." The words stung more than Jake cared to admit. He thought about his father, who had died responding to a warehouse fire when Jake was 19. He thought about his mother, proud of both her husband and son despite never having much money. He thought about the countless people he had helped over the years, and the letters of gratitude that lined his locker at the station. "Everyone has their own path," Jake replied quietly. "Some people measure success differently. Of course they do, Sarah said, checking her expensive watch. Well, I'm sure you need to get back to your important work. I have calls to make with actual business clients. Jake nodded politely and turned to walk away, but Sarah wasn't finished. Oh, and Jake, she called out, causing him to turn back. Maybe next time you could have your truck avoid our street during morning hours? Some of us have important work to do from home and the noise is quite disruptive. We'll do our best, ma'am, Jake replied, though they both knew the fire department couldn't avoid streets based on one person's convenience. As Jake walked back to his crew, Sarah felt a small sense of satisfaction. She had established her position in the neighborhood hierarchy, making it clear that she wasn't like the other residents. In her mind, she had every right to look down on someone whose life ambitions were so limited. What Sarah didn't know was that Jake's crew had overheard most of the conversation. Tom Rodriguez, a veteran firefighter with 20 years of experience, shook his head as Jake approached. Don't let her get to you, kid. We've all met people like that. It's fine, Jake said, though his teammates could see it bothered him. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But as the fire truck pulled away from Maple Street that morning, none of them could have predicted that within just a few weeks, Sarah Martinez's opinion of firefighters would be tested in the most terrifying way possible. Sometimes life has a way of showing people what really matters, and Sarah was about to learn that lesson in a manner she would never forget. 2 weeks after her encounter with Jake, Sarah had almost forgotten about the incident entirely. She was focused on her business, which had been struggling more than she cared to admit since the divorce. Her ex-husband had kept many of their shared clients, and she was working frantically to rebuild her customer base in a new city where she had no established connections. The stress was getting to her, though she would never admit it publicly. Sarah had always prided herself on maintaining a perfect image, from her carefully styled blonde hair to her immaculate wardrobe. But behind closed doors, she was taking anxiety medication and drinking more wine than usual to help her sleep. Her new life in Millbrook was lonelier than she had expected. In her old neighborhood, she had been part of a social circle of wealthy wives who met for tennis and charity luncheons. Here, she knew no one, and her attitude hadn't exactly endeared her to her neighbors. The woman next door had stopped waving when she saw Sarah checking her mail, and the elderly man across the street seemed to actively avoid her. Sarah told herself she didn't need their friendship anyway. These people had nothing to offer her. No business connections, no social status, no intellectual stimulation. She was better off focusing on rebuilding her career and eventually moving back to a more suitable neighborhood. On this particular Thursday evening, Sarah was working late in her home office, desperately trying to prepare a presentation for a potential client meeting the next day. The company was a mid-sized restaurant chain, not the type of high-profile account she usually pursued, but she needed the revenue. Her savings were dwindling faster than she had anticipated, and the mortgage on her new house was still substantial. Around 9 o'clock, her phone rang. The caller ID showed her sister Lisa's number, and Sarah almost ignored it. Lisa lived 3 hours away with her husband David and their 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Ben. The sisters had never been particularly close, especially since Lisa had chosen to marry a public school teacher and live what Sarah considered a boring, middle-class existence. "Hi, Lisa," Sarah answered with barely concealed impatience. "I'm actually quite busy with a presentation right now. I know it's late, but I have some exciting news." Lisa's voice bubbled with enthusiasm. "David got offered a position at the university in your area. We're going to be moving to Millbrook next month. Isn't that wonderful? The kids will finally get to know their aunt better." Sarah's heart sank. The last thing she needed was her sister's ordinary family moving to her new town, serving as a constant reminder of her own failed marriage and childless status. "That's unexpected. Are you sure this is a good career move for David?" "University positions don't pay very well." "Not everything is about money, Sarah," Lisa replied gently. "This is David's dream job, and the kids are excited about the adventure. We found a cute rental house on Oak Street, just a few blocks from you. We were hoping you might help us get settled." Oak Street was even more modest than Maple Street, filled with small starter homes and young families. Sarah couldn't imagine her sister being happy in such surroundings, but then again, Lisa had always had different priorities. Of course I'll help however I can, Sarah lied smoothly. When exactly are you planning to move? Next weekend. I know it's short notice, but David wants to start before the semester begins. We're driving over Saturday morning with a moving truck. The kids are so excited to see you again. After hanging up, Sarah felt overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions she didn't want to examine too closely. Part of her was genuinely happy that Lisa seemed content with her life choices, but a larger part felt threatened by the comparison. Lisa had a loving husband, beautiful children, and an unshakable sense of happiness that didn't depend on material possessions or social status. Meanwhile, Sarah had designer clothes and no one to share dinner with. She had a successful business that was failing and a beautiful house that felt empty. For just a moment, she wondered if she had been measuring success by the wrong standards all these years. But Sarah quickly pushed those thoughts away. She had worked too hard to build her career and establish her independence to start second-guessing herself now. Lisa's family would just have to accept that Sarah had different priorities and a different lifestyle. She wasn't going to pretend to be someone she wasn't just to make them comfortable. The week passed quickly as Sarah threw herself into her work with renewed intensity. She landed the restaurant account, though the fee was lower than she had hoped. She also managed to schedule meetings with 2 other potential clients, giving her hope that her business might survive after all. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, with heavy clouds promising rain. Sarah had reluctantly agreed to meet Lisa's family at their new house to help with the move, though she planned to make it a brief visit. She had work to catch up on, and spending time with excited children wasn't exactly her idea of a productive weekend. When she arrived at the Oak Street address, Sarah found a small but well-maintained house with a tiny front yard and a single car garage. The moving truck was already there, along with David's battered Honda and what appeared to be half the neighborhood. Several families had come out to help with the move, bringing food and introducing themselves to the new arrivals. Sarah felt distinctly out of place in her expensive dress and heels, surrounded by people in casual clothes who seemed genuinely happy to welcome strangers into their community. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had gone out of their way to help her with anything without expecting something in return. Aunt Sarah. Emma ran up to her with a huge grin, followed closely by Ben. Both children looked excited and slightly overwhelmed by all the activity around them. "Mommy said you live really close by now?" "That's right," Sarah replied, awkwardly patting Emma's head. She had never been comfortable around children, especially her own niece and nephew, who always seemed to expect her to be more fun and nurturing than she actually was. Lisa appeared from inside the house, looking tired but happy. "Sarah, thank you so much for coming. These neighbors are incredible. They just started showing up with food and offers to help. I can't believe how friendly everyone is." Sarah looked around at the diverse group of people carrying boxes and furniture. There was an elderly couple from next door, a young mother with a baby strapped to her chest, a teenager who appeared to be helping just because he had nothing better to do. It was the kind of community spirit she had always found slightly ridiculous, but seeing her sister's genuine gratitude made her feel oddly left out. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself drawn into conversations with various neighbors, despite her best efforts to maintain her distance. They asked about her business, complimented her house, and made genuine efforts to include her in their informal community network. For the first time since moving to Millbrook, Sarah felt like she might actually belong somewhere. The following weeks brought an unexpected change to Sarah's routine. With Lisa's family now living just a few blocks away, she found herself reluctantly drawn into their lives more than she had anticipated. Emma and Ben would occasionally walk to her house after school, chattering about their new teachers and friends while Sarah tried to work from her home office. At first, these visits annoyed her. The children were loud and disruptive, asking endless questions about everything from her expensive artwork to why she didn't have a television in every room like other adults. But gradually, Sarah began to look forward to their innocent observations and boundless energy. They saw her house as a magical palace rather than a status symbol, and their genuine excitement about spending time with her was oddly touching. Lisa would pick up the children around dinner time, often inviting Sarah to join their family meals. Sarah usually declined, claiming she had work to finish or business calls to make. The truth was that watching Lisa and David together made her acutely aware of her own loneliness. They had the kind of easy partnership she had never experienced in her own marriage, finishing each other's sentences and sharing private jokes that spoke of years of genuine intimacy. One evening in mid-October, Sarah was working late when she heard Emma's voice calling from her backyard. Looking out the window, she saw her 8-year-old niece standing by the fence that separated their properties, tears streaming down her face. Sarah hurried outside, alarmed by the child's obvious distress. "Emma, what's wrong? Where are your parents?" "They had to take Ben to the hospital," Emma sobbed. "He fell off his bike and hurt his arm really bad. Mommy called Mrs. Peterson to watch me, but she's not home and I got scared being alone." Without hesitation, Sarah opened her back gate and ushered Emma into her house. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can stay here until your parents get back. Ben is going to be fine. Doctors know exactly how to fix hurt arms." As she comforted her niece, Sarah realized this was the first time in years that someone had truly needed her for something that had nothing to do with business or money. Emma trusted her completely, curling up on Sarah's expensive white sofa without worrying about getting it dirty, chattering nervously about her little brother and whether the doctors would give him a cast like her friend Tommy had gotten last year. Sarah found herself genuinely engaged in the conversation, asking questions about Emma's school and friends, learning about the complex social dynamics of 3rd grade that she had never bothered to understand before. For 3 hours, she was simply Aunt Sarah, not the successful businesswoman or the divorced socialite, just someone who could provide comfort and safety to a frightened child. When Lisa and David finally returned with Ben's arm in a colorful blue cast, they found Emma asleep on Sarah's lap while she worked on her laptop with one hand. The sight of Sarah looking so natural and maternal surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. "I can't thank you enough," Lisa whispered as David carefully lifted the sleeping Emma. Mrs. Peterson wasn't home and Emma was too upset to think of anyone else to call. "I'm so glad she felt comfortable coming to you." "Of course," Sarah replied, and she meant it. "She's family, that's what family does." Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself becoming more involved in her sister's life than she had ever been before. She attended Emma's school play, helped Ben practice his spelling words, and even joined them for pizza dinners on Friday nights. The children began calling her simply Sarah instead of Aunt Sarah, and she discovered that she actually enjoyed their company. This growing connection to her sister's family began to change Sarah's perspective on her neighborhood and community. She started noticing things she had overlooked before: the way neighbors helped each other with yard work, the informal network of parents who looked out for each other's children, the genuine friendships that existed between people who had nothing in common except geographic proximity. But old habits die hard, and Sarah still struggled with her ingrained sense of superiority. When she attended the neighborhood Halloween party at the community center, she couldn't help but judge the homemade costumes and potluck dishes. When other parents tried to include her in conversations about local schools and community issues, she found their concerns small and provincial compared to her business challenges. It was at this Halloween party that Sarah encountered Jake Thompson again. He was there with his girlfriend Maria, a kindergarten teacher at the local elementary school. They were dressed as superheroes, and Jake looked completely different out of his firefighter uniform. Younger, more relaxed, genuinely happy. Sarah watched them from across the room, noting how Jake interacted with the children who flocked around him, drawn by his costume and natural warmth. He remembered all their names, asked about their costumes with genuine interest, and helped a shy little girl feel brave enough to participate in the costume contest. Maria seemed equally beloved by her students, and together they created a circle of joy and laughter that drew in everyone around them. For just a moment, Sarah felt a pang of something that might have been regret. She remembered her harsh words to Jake that day outside her house, her dismissive attitude toward his career and life choices. Watching him now, surrounded by people who clearly valued and respected him, She wondered if she had been wrong about more than just firefighters. But the moment passed quickly. Sarah reminded herself that she had worked hard to achieve her success and shouldn't apologize for having higher standards than others. Jake might be popular at a neighborhood Halloween party, but that didn't change the fundamental differences between their life goals and achievements. As the evening wound down, Sarah helped Lisa gather Emma and Ben, who were both exhausted from an evening of sugar and excitement. Ben had been showing off his cast to anyone who would listen, and Emma had won second place in the costume contest for her elaborate princess outfit that Lisa had spent weeks creating. "Did you have fun tonight?" Lisa asked as they walked back toward Oak Street. "I saw you talking to some of the other parents. Mrs. Rodriguez seemed really interested in your marketing business." "It was fine," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Everyone seems very nice." "They are nice," Lisa said firmly. "These are good people, Sarah. They might not have fancy jobs or expensive cars, but they care about each other and their children. There's something to be said for that kind of community." Sarah nodded noncommittally, but privately she wondered if Lisa was being naive. Caring about each other was lovely in theory, but when real problems arose, financial difficulties, serious health issues, major life crises, nice intentions only went so far. What people really needed in those situations was resources, connections, and professional expertise, not homemade casseroles and borrowed lawnmowers. Little did Sarah know that within just 2 weeks, she would discover exactly how wrong she was about the value of community support and the courage of people like Jake Thompson. November 15th started as an ordinary Tuesday. Sarah was in her home office preparing for a video conference with a potential client in Chicago when she heard sirens in the distance. Living in Millbrook had made her more aware of emergency vehicles than she had been in her previous suburban neighborhood, but she didn't think much of it as she adjusted her camera angle and checked her presentation slides one final time. The client meeting went well. Sarah secured a 6-month contract that would significantly improve her financial situation and boost her confidence in her business recovery. Feeling more optimistic than she had in months, she decided to celebrate by taking a long lunch break and maybe stopping by Lisa's house to share the good news. But as she drove toward Oak Street, Sarah noticed something unusual. There were more emergency vehicles in the area than normal. Not just one fire truck, but several, along with police cars and an ambulance. A growing sense of unease settled in her stomach as she turned onto Lisa's street and saw the source of all the activity. Lisa and David's house was on fire. Sarah slammed on her brakes and jumped out of her car, not bothering to lock it as she ran toward the scene. Thick black smoke was pouring from the windows of the small house, and bright orange flames were visible through what had been the living room. Neighbors stood in clusters on the sidewalk, some crying, others comforting each other, all watching helplessly as the fire consumed her sister's new home. "Lisa!" Sarah screamed, frantically scanning the crowd for her sister's face. "Lisa, where are you?" Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman from next door, grabbed Sarah's arm. "They're not here, mija. Lisa took the children to their dentist appointments this afternoon. They don't know yet." Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. Emma and Ben were safe. Lisa was safe. But as she looked at the house being destroyed by flames, she realized that everything else her sister's family owned, their furniture, their clothes, Emma's art projects, Ben's toys, David's books, all, the photos and memories that made a house a home, was disappearing before her eyes. The firefighters worked with professional efficiency, but Sarah could see that the house was already too far gone to save. The flames had spread too quickly, consuming the small structure with terrifying speed. She watched the uniformed figures moving purposefully through the smoke and chaos, and for the first time, she truly understood what Jake had meant about every call being different and everyone mattering to someone. That someone was her family. "Ma'am, you need to stay back," a police officer said firmly, gently but insistently moving Sarah away from the scene. "The firefighters need room to work." Sarah wanted to argue, to demand answers, to do something other than stand helplessly watching her sister's life burn. But she found herself following the officer's instructions, joining the group of neighbors, who were providing what comfort they could through their presence and shared concern. As she stood there, Sarah began to really listen to the conversations around her. Mrs. Rodriguez was already talking about which bedroom her grandchildren could give up so that Lisa's family would have somewhere to stay tonight. The young mother Sarah had met at the Halloween party was making a list of clothing sizes on her phone, planning to organize a collection drive. An elderly man was calling his insurance agent brother-in-law to get advice about navigating the claims process. These people, whom Sarah had dismissed as simple and provincial, were mobilizing to help her sister's family with a speed and efficiency that impressed her. They weren't just offering thoughts and prayers. They were taking concrete action, pooling resources and expertise that Sarah hadn't even known existed in their quiet neighborhood. The fire investigator thinks it started with an electrical problem in the kitchen, Mrs. Rodriguez explained to Sarah as they watched the firefighters continue their work. These older houses, they weren't built for all the modern appliances we use now. Lisa mentioned that the outlets had been sparking lately, but they hadn't gotten around to calling an electrician yet. Sarah felt a stab of guilt. She could have helped with expenses like electrical repairs. She had known that David's teacher salary and Lisa's part-time work as a school secretary didn't leave much room for home maintenance, but she had never offered assistance. She had been too focused on maintaining her own lifestyle and too proud to acknowledge that her family might need help. After 2 hours, the fire was finally under control, but the house was a total loss. The roof had partially collapsed, the windows were blown out, and everything inside had been destroyed by smoke, water, or flame damage. Sarah stared at the skeletal remains of what had been her sister's home just that morning, trying to process the magnitude of the loss. "Sarah?" She turned to see Lisa's voice behind her, though she hardly recognized it. Her sister stood at the edge of the crowd with David, Emma, and Ben, all of them staring in shock at the destroyed house. Lisa's face was white with disbelief, and the children pressed close to their parents, clearly frightened and confused. "We came as soon as we heard," David said numbly. "I couldn't believe it when the school secretary called. She said there was a fire at our address, but I kept thinking, it must be a mistake." Emma began to cry quietly. "Where are we going to live? All my drawings are gone, and my stuffed animals." Ben pointed at the ruined structure with his casted arm. "Our house is broken. Can the firefighters fix it?" Sarah felt her heart break at the children's innocent questions. She had never experienced loss like this herself. Her divorce had been painful, but she had kept her possessions, her home, her basic security. Watching her sister's family confront the reality that everything familiar and safe in their world had vanished in a single afternoon, she finally understood what truly mattered. Without hesitation, Sarah put her arms around both children. "You're going to come stay with me," she said firmly. "My house is big enough for all of us, and we'll figure out everything else as we go." Lisa looked at her sister with surprise and gratitude. "Sarah, we can't impose like that. We'll find somewhere, else maybe a hotel until we can—" "You're not imposing," Sarah interrupted. "You're family, and that's what family does for each other." As the emergency vehicles began to leave and the crowd of neighbors slowly dispersed, each person stopping to offer specific help: spare bedrooms, children's clothes, home-cooked meals, phone numbers for contractors and insurance agents, Sarah realized she was witnessing something remarkable. This community that she had dismissed as ordinary was responding to crisis with extraordinary compassion and practical support. And leading that response were people like the firefighters who had worked tirelessly to contain the blaze and prevent it from spreading to neighboring homes. People like Jake Thompson, who had risked his safety to try to save what could be saved of her sister's home, even though Sarah had treated him with nothing but disdain. That evening, Sarah's house was fuller than it had ever been. Lisa's family sat around her dining room table, still in shock, but beginning to process what they would need to do next. Sarah had given Emma and Ben her guest bedroom, moving her office supplies so they would have space for the few belongings neighbors had managed to gather for them. Lisa and David took the couch in the living room, insisting they didn't want to put Sarah out any more than necessary. The children were exhausted, both emotionally and physically. Emma kept asking questions about their possessions. Would they find her favorite book in the burned house? Could they still have Christmas if all their decorations were gone? Ben simply clung to his mother, overwhelmed by the day's events but too young to fully understand what had happened. As Sarah helped Lisa put the children to bed in their temporary room, she felt a fierce protectiveness toward her sister's family that surprised her with its intensity. These weren't just relatives she saw occasionally at holidays anymore. They were people she genuinely cared about, people whose pain had become her own. "I keep thinking I should have known," Lisa said, quietly as they stood in the hallway outside the children's room. There were signs that something was wrong with the electrical system. David wanted to call an electrician next month when we got paid, but we kept putting it off because the estimate was so expensive. "You couldn't have predicted this," Sarah assured her. "And thank God you weren't home when it happened. Houses can be replaced." "You can't be." Lisa nodded, but Sarah could see the guilt and worry in her sister's eyes. "I keep thinking about all the practical things we need to handle. The insurance company, finding a place to live, getting clothes for the kids, figuring out how to replace David's work materials. Everything feels so overwhelming." Sarah made a decision that would have shocked her former self. "Don't worry about the practical things right now. Focus on your family. I'll handle the logistics." Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into helping her sister's family with the same intensity she had once reserved for her business. She spent hours on the phone with insurance companies, researched temporary housing options, and drove all over town collecting donations from neighbors and local businesses who had heard about the fire. The response from the community was overwhelming. Emma's teacher organized a collection drive at the elementary school. The parents from Ben's preschool created a meal train to ensure the family didn't have to worry about cooking for the next month. Local businesses donated clothing, toys, and household items. Even people who had never met Lisa's family contributed money to a fund that Mrs. Rodriguez had established at the local bank. But it was the firefighters' response that affected Sarah most deeply. Jake Thompson stopped by her house 3 days after the fire, not in an official capacity, but as a neighbor who wanted to help. He brought a box filled with children's books that the fire department had collected, along with 2 teddy bears that were given to children after traumatic events. "I wanted to check on the family," Jake explained when Sarah answered the door. "House fires are especially hard on kids. Sometimes it helps to have something new to hold on to." Sarah invited him in, feeling awkward about their previous encounter, but wanting to show him how much his gesture meant to Emma and Ben. The children's faces lit up when they saw the teddy bears, and Emma immediately asked Jake to read one of the new books to her. As Sarah watched Jake sitting on her living room floor with her niece and nephew, patiently reading a story about a brave little mouse, she felt ashamed of her earlier behavior toward him. This man, whom she had dismissed as limited and unmotivated, was showing her children more genuine kindness than many of the wealthy, educated people she had known in her previous life. "You didn't have to do this," Sarah said when Jake finished the story and was preparing to leave. "I mean, after how I treated you that day on the street." Jake looked puzzled for a moment, then seemed to remember their encounter. "Oh, that? Don't worry about it. Everyone has bad days. What matters now is helping your family get back on their feet." His easy forgiveness made Sarah feel even worse about her previous behavior. "I was completely out of line that day. I said things that were unfair and hurtful, and I want you to know that I'm sorry." "Apology accepted," Jake said simply. "But you should know that what I told you that day was true. Most of us don't do this job for the money or recognition. We do it because everyone deserves to feel safe in their community. That includes your family." After Jake left, Sarah found herself reflecting on the difference between the kind of success she had always pursued and the kind of life he had chosen. She had spent years accumulating possessions and status symbols, but when crisis struck, those things had proven meaningless. What had mattered was the network of relationships and community support that people like Jake had built through years of service and genuine care for others. The fire investigation concluded that the blaze had indeed started with an electrical malfunction in the kitchen. The insurance adjuster confirmed that the house was a total loss, but the family's policy would cover replacement costs for their belongings and temporary living expenses. The news brought relief, but also the daunting realization that rebuilding their lives would be a long process. David's school offered him additional teaching assignments to help with the extra expenses not covered by insurance. Lisa took on more hours at the elementary school office, but it was clear that they would need support from their community to navigate the challenges ahead. Sarah surprised everyone, including herself, by offering to let Lisa's family stay in her house indefinitely. "There's no point in paying for temporary housing when I have plenty of room," she insisted. "Besides, I've gotten used to having you all here." The truth was more complicated than that simple explanation. Having her sister's family in her house had brought a warmth and purpose to Sarah's life that she had never experienced before. Emma and Ben's laughter filled rooms that had been silent for months. Lisa and David's quiet conversations in the evening made the house feel like a real home, rather than just an expensive showcase. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah was part of something larger than her own ambitions. She was needed not for her money or business connections, but for her willingness to open her home and her heart to family members who had nowhere else to turn. It was both humbling and deeply satisfying in ways she had never expected. But the most profound change, in Sarah's perspective, was still to come. 2 weeks after the fire, she would learn that Jake Thompson's commitment to protecting their community went far beyond the call of duty, and that her own family's safety depended on the courage of the man she had once dismissed as a mere service worker. The first signs of trouble came at 3 a.m. on November 30th, exactly 2 weeks after Lisa's house fire. Sarah woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the terrifying sound of Emma screaming from the guest bedroom. For a moment, she thought she was having a nightmare about the fire that had destroyed her sister's home, but the smell was too real, too immediate. Sarah bolted upright and ran toward the children's room, where she found Emma standing at the window, pointing outside with tears streaming down her face. "Aunt Sarah, look, the fire is coming back." Through the window, Sarah could see orange flames flickering in the distance, much closer than they should have been. The dry November wind was howling through the trees, and she realized with growing horror that what appeared to be a brush fire was moving rapidly toward their neighborhood. The drought conditions over the past month had left everything parched and vulnerable, turning the wooded area behind their street into a potential tinderbox. Lisa and David appeared in the hallway, having been awakened by Emma's cries. Ben stumbled out of the bedroom, rubbing his eyes, confused by all the commotion. "What's happening?" he asked sleepily, still clutching the teddy bear Jake had given him. "There's a fire outside," David said grimly, looking out the window at the approaching flames. "We need to get everyone ready to evacuate if necessary." The sound of sirens filled the air as emergency vehicles raced toward the scene. Sarah could hear neighbors talking loudly in their yards, car doors slamming, and the general chaos that comes when an entire community realizes they might be in danger. The peaceful suburban street had transformed into a scene of barely controlled panic. Sarah's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. "Wildfire approaching residential area. Residents of Maple Street and Oak Street should prepare for possible immediate evacuation. Monitor local radio for updates." "We should pack some things," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice calm for the children's sake. "Important documents, medications, a change of clothes for everyone." As they frantically gathered essential items, Sarah found herself thinking about all the possessions she had once considered so important. Her expensive furniture, her collection of artwork, her designer clothes. None of it seemed to matter when faced with the possibility of losing everything to flames for the second time in 2 weeks. The fire continued to advance despite the efforts of the firefighting crews. Through her bedroom window, Sarah could see the red glow growing brighter and closer. The wind was pushing the blaze directly toward their street, and she could hear the crackling of burning vegetation getting louder by the minute. At 4:30 a.m., the official evacuation order came. Police officers went door to door, giving residents 15 minutes to gather what they could carry and leave immediately. Sarah helped Lisa pack the children into her BMW, while David threw their hastily assembled belongings into the trunk. As ye were, they prepared to drive away from the house that had become their sanctuary. Emma began crying again. "I don't want to lose another house," she sobbed. "All our new things are in there." Sarah felt her heart break for her niece, who had already endured so much loss in her young life. "Whatever happens to the house, We're all together and safe, she told Emma firmly. That's what matters most. They joined the convoy of vehicles leaving the neighborhood, but traffic moved slowly as everyone tried to evacuate at once. Through her rearview mirror, Sarah could see the fire had reached the edge of their street, and individual houses were beginning to catch flame. The dry conditions and high winds were making it nearly impossible for the firefighters to contain. The blaze, look! Ben pointed excitedly out the car window. It's the fire truck with our friend Jake. Sarah followed his gaze and saw Jake Thompson's crew setting up their equipment directly between the advancing fire and the remaining houses. On Maple Street, instead of evacuating with everyone else, the firefighters were positioning themselves in the path of the most dangerous part of the blaze, preparing to make a final stand to save what homes they could. Traffic came to a complete stop about 6 blocks away from Sarah's house, trapped behind other evacuating residents. From their position, they had a clear view of the firefighters working frantically to establish fire breaks and soak the remaining structures with water. Sarah watched in amazement as Jake and his crew refused to retreat, even as the flames grew higher and more threatening around them. They're not leaving, David observed with a mixture of admiration and concern. They're going to try to save the houses. Sarah realized that her home, the place where she had found family and purpose for the first time in years, was directly in the path of the fire. But more importantly, Jake and his fellow firefighters were risking their lives to protect it, along with the homes of all her neighbors. For the next hour, they watched the battle unfold. The firefighters worked with incredible coordination, using every tool and technique at their disposal to slow the fire's advance. Sarah could see Jake directing operations, his small crew moving efficiently despite being vastly outnumbered by the scale of the blaze they were fighting. At one point, the wind shifted dramatically, sending a wall of flames directly toward the position where Jake's crew was working. Sarah watched in horror as the firefighters found themselves surrounded by fire on 3 sides, cut off from their escape route by the rapidly changing conditions. They're trapped, Lisa whispered, gripping David's hand tightly. Sarah felt a terror unlike anything she had ever experienced. This man who had shown such kindness to her family, who had forgiven her cruel words and continued to serve their community with dedication and courage, was now in mortal danger trying to save her house and neighborhood. But Jake and his crew didn't panic. With professional calm that spoke of years of training and experience, they deployed their emergency shelters and called for aerial support. A helicopter appeared overhead, dropping fire retardant in a precise pattern that created a corridor of safety for the trapped firefighters. Through that corridor, Jake's crew managed to escape the immediate danger while continuing to fight the fire from a safer position. Their courage and quick thinking had prevented a tragedy, but the battle for the neighborhood was far from over. As dawn broke, the combined efforts of multiple fire crews, aerial support, and favorable wind changes finally began to turn the tide against the blaze. The fire was contained before it could destroy any more homes, though several houses on the outskirts of the neighborhood had been damaged. When residents were finally allowed to return to assess the damage, Sarah drove slowly back to Maple Street with her heart pounding. She expected to find her house reduced to ashes, but as they turned the corner, she saw it standing intact, blackened by smoke but structurally sound. Jake Thompson was sitting on the tailgate of his fire truck, exhausted and covered in soot, completing his incident report. When he saw Sarah's car pull up, he stood and walked over to meet them. "Your house made it through," he said simply, his voice hoarse from smoke and fatigue. "Some smoke damage on the exterior, but the structure is fine. You should be able to move back in once the area is cleared." Sarah looked at this man who had spent the night risking his life to protect her home and community, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude and shame. "Jake," she began, but found herself unable to finish the sentence. "No need to say anything," Jake replied gently. "This is what we do. This is why we do it." Emma and Ben tumbled out of the car and ran to hug Jake, their teddy bears still clutched in their arms. "You saved our new house," Emma exclaimed. "You're a real hero." Jake knelt down to their level, smiling despite his exhaustion. "We all saved it together. Your Aunt Sarah saved it by giving you a safe place to stay. Your parents saved it by keeping you safe. Heroes come in all different kinds. As Sarah watched Jake interact with her niece and nephew, she finally understood what he had tried to tell her that day outside her house. Success wasn't measured by income or education or social status. It was measured by the willingness to put others before yourself, to serve something larger than your own interests, to find meaning in making other people's lives better and safer. That afternoon, Sarah did something she had never done before. She wrote a letter to the local newspaper, praising the courage and dedication of the Millbrook Fire Department and specifically mentioning Jake Thompson's heroic actions. She donated a substantial amount to the Firefighters' Benevolent Fund, and she volunteered to help organize community support for other families who had been affected by the fire. But most importantly, she apologized. Not just to Jake, but to her sister, to her neighbors, and to herself for the years she had spent believing that success meant standing above others rather than standing with them. 6 months later, Sarah's business was thriving in ways she had never expected. Instead of pursuing only high-end corporate clients, she had begun working with local nonprofits and community organizations, using her skills to help them tell their stories and secure funding. The work paid less than her previous corporate contracts, but it brought a satisfaction she had never experienced in her old career. Lisa and David had found a new house just 3 blocks away, but they still came to Sarah's for dinner every Sunday. Emma and Ben still called her simply Sarah, but now it felt like a term of endearment rather than familiarity. And Jake Thompson had become a genuine friend, someone Sarah respected not just for his courage in emergencies but for his everyday kindness and integrity. On the first anniversary of the night Jake had risked his life to save their neighborhood, Sarah organized a community barbecue to honor all the first responders who served Millbrook. As she watched Jake playing catch with Ben in her backyard while Emma showed off her latest art project to Maria, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed. She had learned that true success meant building relationships rather than accumulating possessions, that real strength came from serving others rather than standing above them, and that heroes often wore ordinary uniforms and drove old cars and measured their worth by the lives they touched rather than the money they earned. Most importantly, she had learned that family wasn't just about blood relations but about the people who chose to stand by you when everything else fell apart. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that family could include a firefighter who was brave enough to risk everything to save the people and places you loved most.